The Israelis are cowards. The biggest threat to Jews and Judaism is Israel itself. They just bring them from all around the world to sit here and colonize land. And they make them human shields. I'm more free in a third world country that lives through civil war. I am more free to say my say as a journalist than any American journalist. I mean, I don't think the Americans are doing okay, so so this whole myth that they sell to us in the third world countries or in Lebanon or in the Arab region or the Middle East, oh, the American dream. No, I don't want that dream.
Hello everyone, I'm Rania Khalek and this is Dispatches. Israel's genocide in Gaza has gone on for 9 months, seemingly with no end in sight. There appear to be no red lines for what Israel can do. Its army can wipe out entire neighborhoods, displace 2 million people over and over again, drop 2,000-pound US supplied bombs on tents full of refugees who've been deliberately starved of food, water, and medicine, destroy every hospital in Gaza, and kidnap and torture the doctors, nurses, and patients. And the Israelis continue lying that their Palestinian victims are the ones committing the atrocities, even as Israeli soldiers and leaders openly celebrate their genocidal intent. All the while, Israel keeps threatening Lebanon with annihilation, as its propaganda army lays the groundwork with easily disproven lies about Hezbollah. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Lebanese journalist Ghadi Francis. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. Ghadi Francis, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again, Rania.
It's such a pleasure to have you on again. There's so much I want to talk to you about. And I had you on a few months back. And what's crazy is I went back to find the episode to see when it was I had you on, because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But it was in December, actually, in the beginning of December, we did an episode. And in the beginning of December, I mean, we were talking a lot about it's crazy. Yeah. So like December was 3-4 months in. Now we're at 9 months, going on 10 months. The death toll, they stopped counting because they can't really count anymore, but you have the Lancet saying it might be as high as or higher than 186,000 people in Gaza killed. There was an article in the New York Times recently that I'm sure you saw as well that's, showed that the Israelis, as they're holding these Palestinians, they basically kidnapped from Gaza in these concentration camps that they're calling prisons. They've been sodomizing them to death with metal sticks. I mean, it's just what we're hearing is so disgusting. And one thing I've noticed about me, and I don't know if you can relate to this, is I have stopped having a visceral reaction to images that come across my social media feed. It's like I feel numb now to watching people being blown up. And I fear I'm becoming like desensitized to basically like our people in this region just being mass murdered. So I all that's to set you up. I just like your perspective on, now that we're 9, almost 10 months into this horrific genocide, what are your general thoughts on the fact that it's still ongoing? There doesn't seem to be an end in sight, and we're just watching babies be torn to shreds.
I think there's no way to tell people how to handle it, especially people like us who have a conscience and cannot think of anything else other than the genocide. Because there are people around the world who are not like us, Rania. There are people around the world who don't care and who are more interested in finding out who hit Donald Trump's ear. In the same day that babies in tents were hit by bombs from F-16s from the so-called American democracy. So it's all proportional now to what kind of human you have chosen to be and how involved you are. And there's no way in telling people how they should handle seeing massacres. I want to tell you, I thought I was numb until this morning. I was watching an old new video of a mom trying to look for her son's grave because she had buried him, and they actually, in their most recent massacre, the Israelis also tore the graveyard as well and bombed it. And then in the end, she found the grave after digging sand with her bare hands, and that broke me this morning. And I had thought I'm numb too. I don't think we're numb. I think we're just trying to adjust to the reality that our duty today is to keep our voices and to keep screaming. and to try to sustain as much as we can our mental health, to be the delivery, to try to be the delivery for our people who have no voices, who the world don't want to listen to or to hear or to see. I'm talking about you personally, Rania, as a journalist in your work, in your field, as an American Lebanese journalist. I'm talking about myself personally as a journalist, as an activist, as a human who has a platform to talk to other humans about this or to like shake some conscience out there. Our job is not to be numb, but our job is to be as realistic as possible and to understand that this struggle is a 76-year-old struggle. And even more, if you go back in the history of the Levant and of our nation, I'm speaking about Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, Mesopotamia. This land, this whole land is holy because it's a very rich culture. It's a melting pot of civilization, of tradition, of strength, of resources, and even the humans of this land have always been pioneers. So this land has been under these kinds of raids from barbaric colonizers throughout history. We have suffered a lot, and our ancestral pain always is inside us. And I think this is why we are more resilient and resistant and strong. And this is why the people of Gaza are surprising the world. Because even as all these atrocities that we are seeing and hearing about are happening, they are still finding strength to go to the beach, to sing a song, to make a vlog about food that they are making from the scarce uh, grains or sugar that they are getting. They are still finding it in themselves to teach everyone else that life, they don't only deserve life, they are masters of life, they are masters of resistance. So I think our job today is to know that this struggle is very bloody and the price is very high. And these atrocities that we are seeing are only going to pave the way to the liberty. There is no coming back from here. There is no way coming back from here. The world will not surpass that. Humankind cannot step over that. When the Lancet, when the one of the oldest medical journals in Britain talks about 186,000 uh, deaths, and this can be more because the massacre they spoke. If it stopped today, that would be the number, and it didn't stop. So when you have these pieces of truths spread all around the world, whether it's from South Africa and the ICC, from the Lancet Journal, from all these human rights activists and people around the world screaming in the streets after 9 months, you see that there's no coming back from here. No matter what happens, there's only one way forward, and it is the liberty and the justice for the Palestinian people.
That's so incredibly said, and I wanna ask you to elaborate on a couple things you touched on because I think it's really important since we're speaking to a mostly English speaking audience. Likely most people who are watching are based in the US, and people are learning a lot for the first time about this region. So you said something really important. You talked about our region and you mentioned many countries. You didn't mention just Lebanon, you didn't mention just Palestine, you mentioned Syria, you mentioned Iraq, and on. And so I want to talk a little bit about divide and conquer because that's been the strategy by imperialists in this region is to divide and conquer, to split us up by country, by sect. And something that you're quite known for in Lebanon is you go. I mean, you give very fiery interviews. Very, if people think you speak well in English, I mean, your Arabic is, unmatched.
Thank
And
you.
you talk a lot from a perspective of you talk about yourself as Palestinian, as Syrian, as Lebanese, as all of these things. And I think that kind of is confusing for people because when people in the US hear about this issue, they think of Palestine as this one space, this one country, Lebanon's separate, Syria's separate, Iraq is separate, and it's all one big Muslim issue if you're going to connect it in any way. Neither you or I are Muslim, and we care very deeply about this issue because this is our land too. So I just kind of want you to explain that to people who maybe don't know that or understand it that way, don't understand the history of how this region has been split by the Americans, by the French, by the British, with borders as well as by sect, and why when you talk about Palestine, you talk about it like it's your land too.
Well, in this world, everybody has a freedom to identify personally, no matter like they choose to be non-binary sometimes, they choose to be leftist, rightist, they choose to be neo-Nazis in Europe sometimes, and they give them the freedom to be that. I chose that history didn't stop after the World War One, after they divided this region. I just chose that whatever the Western powers did after the World War One and after they conquered the Ottoman Empire to this region is not definitive and it's not defining. We had one colonization, the Ottomans, and then the Ottomans lost the war, and then the French and the British and the Americans and all the people who conquered the Ottomans were dividing influence and land and money and power in this region. And they drew borders that are very funny. If we were two separate nations between Lebanon and Syria, you can walk there and it's the same families. There's no actual distance. Some homes are like partitioned between the two newly formed states. This is the same for Palestine and the same between Iraq and Syria because these borders were man-made and politics made. Now, I'm not speaking as if I want no Iraq, no Syria, no Palestine, no Lebanon today. I'm a very realistic person. I'm not saying that today we can all be one nation and call ourselves Greater Syria like it was. It actually was just before the World War One ended. And this is not it's not a point of view. It's just a point of history. Anybody, any person, any human can just go to the simplest search platform, Google, and they can Google what was here 100 years ago. What was Beirut? What was Tripoli? What was Safad? What was this land called, and how was it governing itself, and what kind of culture did it have, and what kind of transportation systems, and even touristic campaigns? How did people come here? How did they visit? How did the travel books that came out in the 18th and the 19th century? There are tens and hundreds of travel books written by actual Western people who visited this area, and if they don't like to listen to a like brown Lebanese girl tell them facts, they can listen to white people, white colonizers in the 18th century. They said the same about this region. So, so I identify as a human from the melting pot of civilization, from the greater Syria. Our traditions and our culture is blended. We are part of Babylon. We are part of the best civilizations out there in the history. I am so proud that thousands of years ago in our land and in our nation, people invented communication skills, arts, even law and regulations and humanitarian issues where their females were empowered. The history of my land gives me so much pride, just like any human would be proud of where they come from or who their ancestry is. The problem is some people are just victims of the brainwash that has happened constantly for decades. We cannot really blame people in Lebanon if they identify as the religion or the sect because they're coming from civil war, and at some time in the 70s their sect or their religious identity was their whole existential being, which was persecuted. So it is only natural for many people in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, after decades of war and colonization and problems and poverty, and very funded, very widely funded media worked on us. And I'm not talking about today's mainstream media. Rania, imagine in the 30s, the Zionists funded a newspaper in Lebanon to make Christians Christians and not Lebanese. I'm talking about 1930, and this is written in Eliyahu Sasson's papers. It is written by the Zionists themselves. They used to fund media and play on the general awareness because this is the way to conquer. And I don't think it's all bad. I think it's good to recite and say what happened here to be able to find our way out. Today, if just let's think about it, if Damascus, Baghdad, Beirut, Jerusalem, Amman, if these cities had a shared transportation system, tourism, economy, and if they could use their oil and their their resources, do you think any other regional power can play with them? I'm talking about the Gulf or Iran or Turkey. A greater Syrian nation, a Levantine nation, would be pioneering worldwide because it's very rich, and the human there, uh, our humans, are very knowledgeable and educated, and they spread their knowledge all around the world. You can see them. If these people that came from this land and went all across the world and did all kinds of success, and if this land was governed by its own people and they were connected to each other, there is no power that can take and that can choose which part of our land to take and to give to Manhattan people or to Polish people, like it's happening in Palestine. So it was the first way to take our land was to change our identities into very manageable and easily manipulated identity. And the easiest way to control someone is to tell them it's like God told me that you should be this way, and to make them really follow you and to involve God in it, like a bigger, higher conscious power. So it worked for a long time, but I refuse to think that it will be the end of Lebanon or Syria or Jordan, because I can see like more than 30% of people in every time in Lebanon, there's something that shakes the political status quo. For example, the beginning of the uprisings, not after they are politicized, the beginnings of the uprisings, or sometimes in the elections, some candidates and how the numbers and how these fights, like these normal democratic fights, happen in the communities. They tell me that no, I'm not the only Christian that was born in a house that prays to God in the Christian way, but thinks that this is all about religion and politics has nothing to do with it. I think there's a very big amount of people, whether they're Christian, Muslim, atheists, regardless how they choose to lead with their spiritual life, we share one common ground in politics. We want a secular system. We want a wider nation. We want sovereignty. We want to have our own say in how to use our own land. And this is why I refuse to say like whatever the patriarch says or the mufti says. I don't want to even listen to them. They're irrelevant to me,
Oh, that's
you
a
know?
fair point. It's a fair point. And I mean, that's not to deny, obviously, because then the people who are against what you're saying would say, oh, but then look at the people who are fighting. They're all Islamists. Um, and they'll point to that. But I also think it's important to recognize that, I mean,
But
there
they're
are
not.
resistance groups.
But
Well,
they're
they're not
not.
all Islamists. They're not all
No, no.
Islamists.
We want to tell them. We want to tell them that if they have a problem with the actual Islamism of the resistance, this is only a result of their introduction to these people for 100 years, telling us that we are sects.
Mhm.
When people are more religious, it's a result of this is the consequences that happen, but we want to remind the world that the first act of resistance happened in this land when the first mother refused to leave her home, and that has happened since day one in Palestine and in Lebanon. And people were not Islamists then; they were just indigenous people, and today we refuse to see them as anything else. They are the indigenous people, regardless of how they pray, what they choose in politics. They are fighting for their homes. There are many Islamists around the world. I don't see that they have any problem with ISIS in Eastern Syria. They like Islamists over there, the West. They buy petrol and oil from them. They don't mind them over there. They don't mind Islamists if they are serving their purposes. And by the way, if you go back a little bit more in history to the 70s and to the 60s, if you want to ask who introduced the idea of Al Mujahideen to fight whom in the region, well, it's the Americans. They wanted to fight the Soviets. So don't speak to us about Islam as if you are very innocent, because your hands are all over that. Your fingerprints in politics and in policies in the Middle East. I'm speaking to the West now. Their fingerprints are all over that. I just want to always insist and remind people who are following us today, who are viewing what we are saying, that there are communists not only died fighting the Israelis in Lebanon, there are communist young girls like Lola Aboud. She went and she bombed herself to kill Israelis. She was communist. She wasn't Islamist. She didn't have a heaven to go to. There wasn't any book that told her to do that. She was simply angry because they slaughtered her people, and she simply wanted to die fighting them just because it was that unjust and that cruel. And there's a similar girl from South Lebanon. She wasn't an Islamist. Her name is Sana Muhaidli. She was 18 years old. She drove a car filled with bombs and killed herself and 14 Israelis at a checkpoint when the Israelis occupied Lebanon. She wasn't Islamist. She was a Syrian social nationalist. She didn't care about the afterlife. And she said in her message, I hope after I die, my spirit and the spirit of other martyrs, my friends like me, would form a new bomb and we would bomb ourselves again to conquer the occupation. So these people and these ideologies were not Islamic. It wasn't up until the Islamic Republic in Iran started and the Islamic Revolution in Iran won that the Islamic resistance became a part of Lebanon. In Lebanon, and it was in the 1979. But let's not forget what happened in the 60s and in the 80s, and let's not forget what is happening today. And it's the resistance. I refuse to designate resistance as only fighting with weapons. I say every single mother who is going back and cleaning her house and the rubble is a top fighter in our resistance. Every single little girl who's recording a vlog and singing is a leader in the resistance. The resistance is the act of existing when everybody in the world is paying billions of dollars to make you a refugee and to make you leave your country. So everybody in Palestine is resisting. Everybody in Lebanon is resisting. Even the people that, as we record this uh, interview, they are sitting at the beach enjoying the beautiful seaside of Lebanon, or maybe a cup of beer. They are resisting as well because they refuse to leave their country. And now we are fighting billions of dollars whose all they want to do is take our land and make us and turn us into refugees. That is if we survive.
I think that's so important to say. And you know who recognizes exactly what you're saying is the Israelis. I mean, that's why they attack journalists, they attack intellectuals, they attack Palestinians no matter what they're doing, whether they have weapons or whether they don't, because existing is a form of resistance, writing, doing vlogs from Gaza. And like you said, literally just not leaving your land is a form of resistance when you're constantly at risk of being ethnically cleansed. And like you said, with a billions of dollars project. And to speak to the issue of Lebanon, I just want to show you, in case you didn't see it, Israel's new propaganda as they try to prepare some sort of propagandistic groundwork for what they think they can do to Lebanon. So I'm going to play two things actually. First, I'm going to play
They're gonna do to
recent.
Lebanon?
Well, first
Yeah.
I'm going to play the Israeli education minister speaking last week.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and listen to him. For those who are just listening, I'm sorry, it's Hebrew, and I'll give you a summary after it's over. So here we go.
אז אני אומר את זה לצרפתים ולאחרים, מה שנקרא, ממדינות העולם שטוענות את זה. אין שום הבדל בין חיזבאללה ללבנון. לבנון תושמד לאור כמו שהדברים מתקדמים. ואני אומר את זה אפילו עכשיו בצורה מאוד בוטה. אנחנו באירוע שבו לבנון הולכת לקראת השמדה. לא תהיה אותה לבנון כמו שהם מכירים. אני לא הולך להתעסק בצייד קטיושות של חיזבאללה. את המחיר התוקפנות מאדמת לבנון תשלם מדינת לבנון.
השתמשת במילה, אני לא אמרת, ביקשת שאני לא אקטע אותך. תושמד. השמדה יש לה במינוח העברי, אתה יודע, לשר הביטחון אמר תחזור לימי האבן.
אתה יודע מה? אני מתקן את דבריי, לא תושמד. לבנון כמו שאנחנו מכירים אותה לא תהיה קיימת, לבנון תשלם את המחיר הכבד בגלל חיזבאללה. ואני מתקן את דבריי, לא תושמד, אני מדייק. אז אני אומר את זה
Okay, so for those who were just listening and couldn't see the subtitles, that's Israel's education minister. This man is in charge of their education system, saying that he wants to annihilate Lebanon, and then he corrects himself because he's challenged by the TV host who seems a bit shocked. He corrects himself and says, no, forget annihilation. Lebanon will cease to exist. So I'm just curious, what's your response to that attitude by the Israelis? Please, Ghadi, go ahead.
I want to see footage of him while our Hudhud drone flies over, running under the sounds of sirens, running to the shelter. I want to see that kind of footage because I'm sure he's doing a lot of that these days.
Mm.
Well, well, if they, Rania, it's very nice that the whole world can see who they are and what they want. It's very nice that they are actually telling the world who they are, but some racist people around the world refuse to see them as who they are, even when they say that. And they want us to be designated as terrorists when we hold a flag, a Palestinian flag. It's that it's that bias in the world. But I want to tell everyone, including these people that think that, I want to tell them all that the Israelis have always wanted to do that. It's not a matter of what they want to do or what they would wish to do. It's a matter of what they can do. And I would really like to state a factual fact, not my feeling or pride, because I'm so proud to be a Lebanese, especially in these days. I am so proud to be a Lebanese and to be that important in my solidarity with my brothers and sisters in Palestine, because these baby killers have only one fear in the Middle East, and it is the Lebanese people, and I'm so proud. I'm so proud. They don't fear the ICC. They don't fear, and they fear our, he called them Katyusha. I can I can advise people to do some Google about what kind of artillery and what kind of military AI technology Hezbollah is using. And if it's only Katyusha that really defeated the Iron Dome, I mean, man, you have to reconsider your Iron Dome. If it's only Katyusha that Hezbollah has, how come the Iron Dome was defeated? And what about the Golan Heights? Do you still have any tower over there? I mean, if it's only Katyusha, then there's no such thing as Israeli excellence in military. Well, there isn't. But I'm just trying to entertain the idea that this sick person was saying. And add to that, not only they couldn't. Another fact, like in 2006, and on a day like today, there was war. In July, between July and August, there was war for 33 days, constant planes, ships, on the ground, tanks. They tried everything, everything. They bombed even northern Lebanon. They bombed infrastructure. They bombed everything. They couldn't take 1 meter of land. 1 meter. They couldn't take 1 meter of Lebanon's land. Not one squared meter. So, we're talking today, more than 15 years later, of a lot of expertise have grown, and a lot of new technologies have been encrypted in the systems of the resistance. So some part of me knows that there will come a point where they're gonna try to invade Lebanon, and I can't wait to show them lesson number 2,
Do you
that they
think it's
can take
inevitable?
nothing. Of
Do you
course
think
it's
it's inevitable?
of course it's inevitable, because we are dealing with barbaric people who just want to kill us all, who just protest against getting milk to babies. They are openly calling for slaughter one way or the other. And even if it stops for a period of time, there will be another season of this war, because in this place of the world, it's either the indigenous people or the invaders. There's no way to go into peace after 186,000 people are slaughtered. I mean, people who call for peace, I would really like to see their stance if this happens in their countries. If someone comes from Poland and takes your home and kills 200,000 people in 7 months in your country, you'd like to coexist with them. Well, peace be upon you, but we don't. You know?
I know. I mean, I think that's really fair, and I think most people would absolutely fight for their survival. It's just a matter of not seeing people in this region as being human enough to be allowed to fight for their survival. But Ghadi, I think there's something else important that's happening now, and we talked about this the last time I had you on. You have traveled across the region. You've reported from every war zone, from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon. You've been to Gaza. You've been to Gaza's tunnels. Um, and so, when you think about wars of the past and what we're seeing take place now, as horrible as it is, you do see this new I don't know if I want to call it a level of coordination, but there's resistance groups in every country and they're all participating in some way. It's really historic to watch. And if Israel was to unleash some sort of bigger war on Lebanon than it already has, we know that Hezbollah wouldn't be alone. Just as in many ways Hamas, is fighting the fight, they're at the forefront of it in Gaza, but there's other participants around the region as well. So I'm just curious if your views, your perspective on having watched the region change and shift and just kind of seeing this axis of resistance not just form but really come together and working to almost in conjunction with each other to the point where you have the Yemenis firing at the Israelis and stopping ships, and the Iraqis firing when they can, and of course Hezbollah's firing every single day, and Hamas, and then in the West Bank there's groups as well. I mean, we've never seen anything like this.
I think this extends to the people in the campuses in the United States of America, and to the journalists and to the doctors that are being persecuted all across the world for their views and for their solidarity. The front is big. It's it depends on the amount of humanity that you have in you. And I think these people, regardless of the tag that they are in access, they are humans. They are just being humans. And what use is all the arms and the weapons if at such times they don't show their solidarity? I mean, if every human in the region, if every so-called Islam person really wanted to stand next to their brothers of Islam in Palestine, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, actually, other than the political side, if everybody wanted to arm Palestinians, that would be the end of it. But nobody wants to say no to America. And I wanted to just put one note, Rania, when we say if the Israelis wanted an open war with Hezbollah, they don't know anything about war. They can't win any war. It's an American war. We have seen the Israelis are they bring mercenaries, cowards. They dance very well on TikTok. Other than that, we've seen them. Some of them are speaking in their Congress or whatever. You can see their clips about their about the tremendous mental health issues that they have, because they know they're fighting for no cause or no reason. They have been brought here to kill innocent people who have been born here to like a long line of families. So in the end, the Israelis cannot do anything. It's a matter of the American decision, I suppose, because they can stop giving them weapons. That would be done. They can stop giving them uh, immunity and the UN and impunity. That will be done. They can stop funding all the organizations that are working to dehumanize Palestinians in media, and that will be done. They are the active part of the war. The Israelis are only the pawns, the very racist, barbaric, anti-human, child killer pawns.
I want to also ask you about, well, you talk about these different fronts and you mentioned the campuses, and you do spend quite a bit of time going back and forth between Lebanon and various Western countries, particularly across Europe. Um, and you've gone to protests. For example, I know you've been to protests in London, and you've always been very, very supportive of campus protests across the US. So, just from your vantage point, this is, I mean, well, this, for me at least, this is the first time I've seen this much widespread support for Palestine across Western countries. So I'm curious what that looks like for you. I mean, you've grown up in Lebanon, you've
It's
spent
the
your
best.
time, most of
It's
your
the
life,
best.
yeah, across the Middle East. So watching the movements and the activism across the West, do you think it matters?
I think it matters so much, and I'm so happy to feel seen when I see these young people, when I see these young Londoners angry for my people. I swear to God, it's really relieving in too many ways. I can't even start describing. It makes me feel seen as a race, as a human, as a country, as a person, as a Palestinian, as a Lebanese. It makes me feel like all the screaming that we have done and all the work that we have done, it has not gone in vain. People see us, see our cause, you know, and moreover, I haven't seen this kind of solidarity in Lebanon. it just felt only natural that I'm here to go and see what's happening in the street. Because in Lebanon we didn't get that. Because uh, I wish if the general youth awareness about Palestine and Lebanon came close to what we witnessed in the American colleges and in the British colleges. I wish we had that in Lebanon. We are too busy fighting each other and too busy conquering each other's ideologies that are more than thousands years old, religious or whatever, and a lot of money has been put to polarize our youth into that, like Shia, Sunni, Uwait, Kataib, Hezbollah, Harakat Amal, the fights on social media. And when they actually went to protest for Palestine in the beginning of the massacre, it turned really turbulent and wasn't really beautiful and wasn't really done well. Some of the political parties of the traditional political parties try to show solidarity, but it wasn't enough. I knew at some point I went to a Safir newspaper and there was like a Najah Wakim, a very veteran political figure in Lebanon, was calling for a conference for Palestine, and there was this full press release about it. And I remember I was angry over there at everyone. I'm telling them, why do you want to make press releases? Go and disrupt some, like protest in front of the AUBMC because doctors are being killed. Do something to show something. Stop writing press releases. I mean, we have been, and this is a point really touched very well by Antoun Saadi, the thinker that I revere and I believe is my teacher. So Antou Saadi back then says that one of the main problems about the Palestinian issue is that we made it an Arab issue. So it became just kind of a protocol or a routine, or we do that, we say that, we sing that, we recite that poem, and we go back home. We didn't actually feel it. It became something too wide and general, so everybody has a part in this general cause at 76 decades. So we have been normalized into, okay, we die, we protest, we go back home. While the young people, the young generation that has shown its voice to the world, they refuse to make it a tradition or something normal. It's not normal, it's not Arab, it's personal, it's human, it's me, it's my sister, it's a journalist like me. So I think the trend of making Palestine an Arab issue failed. Palestine is a Palestinian issue, it's a Lebanese issue, it's a Syrian issue, it's an issue of the people that are directly targeted by these colonizers in the history of this war. And making it an Arab or an Islamic issue did not really help it in the past. We haven't seen that kind of solidarity from any entity that calls itself like a big big wave of Arabism or Islamism. Didn't serve Palestine well. The people, the structure that are like they're not in order. You see the Yemenis, you see some Iraqis, you see some Lebanese, you see some people in Syria. You will see them in the future. I think people who think that Syria is not a part of this front are very much mistaken, because Syria is the actual backbone of the front fighting the Israelis. If there was no Syria, there wouldn't be Hezbollah. It would be something, we would be like, if Syria was like Jordan, for example. If Syria,
Or
or like Egypt.
yeah. Or like Libya, or if Syria was destroyed and turned into a country like Libya, where you just had a bunch of armed groups controlling various
Exactly.
parts of it.
Exactly.
You wouldn't, yeah.
So each part
I
of this axis served a way, and I think in the West, when I see these people protesting, I know that it's relieving, and I know that things have changed.
I want to also ask you to touch on something that I think is important because of the way things are framed by the Israeli PR machine in the US. And that's when it comes to the issue of anti-Semitism and of, oh, they just
Wow.
hate them because they're Jews. Arabs just hate Jews. That's what it's about. Just like Nazis, we all just hate that's what they want. They want to say that Arabs all hate the Jews. That's why we don't like Israel. That's our problem with Israel. And I do think, obviously, Israel's existence as a settler colony, saying it's the Jewish state, has certainly created a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment across the Middle East. It's quite logical because of how Israel portrays itself as the leader of Judaism and Jewish people. I'm just curious, you grew up in Lebanon. And you have I've heard you talk about this before. You make a very clear distinction between Zionism and Judaism. You know they're different. You know that Israel's full of BS when they say that they represent all Jews. But you grew up in Lebanon, a country that faced Israeli occupation. They used the Star of David to make graffiti everywhere. I'm just curious, like, as you grew up, how you understood Jews and Israel and what Zionism means, and just what your thoughts are on the way that they try to smear all of us as anti-Semites. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.